Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this very exciting segment today on the 9th day of May 2023. 18 degrees and getting up to about 22. But hey, how has that chill been affecting you? Well, for me, it's very, very chilly for the time of the morning when I go walking and take my pickies. It's very, very cold, but it is that time of the year coming on to June when it will be the coldest. We will look at the cold front in a little bit of detail just after the news in brief. So first up, the news in brief.
Jim Chalmers is delivering the first surplus in 15 years when he turns down tonight's budget. The dramatic turnaround has been driven by high commodity prices, a strong jobs market and a boost in net migration. But it's not expected to stick around, with deficits forecast to return as the government grapples with rising welfare payments and increased costs from the NDIS and aged care. In breaking news, some Telstra customers are experiencing issues making and receiving calls this morning as the telco deals with an outage. Technicians have been working on it since late last night. Telstra has confirmed calls to 000 and mobile data should not be affected, and has told customers to use their devices on aeroplane mode and to make calls on Wi-Fi instead. The company says it's working urgently to fix the issue. And Qantas will take on the Transport Workers Union in the High Court in Canberra today in a bid to overturn a federal court ruling that the largest outsourcing decision in Australian history was illegal. Qantas announced 1,700 baggage handling and cleaning jobs would go during the pandemic in late 2020 in what the company says was a commercial decision. The Transport Workers Union says the real reason was that Qantas wanted to thwart workers' rights in any future industrial action, a move which is banned under the Fair Work Act.
There you are, ladies and gentlemen, up to date on Australian Indian Radio. And yes, we have been affected by that outage of Telstra. And this morning there was a bit of a commotion because some of our mobiles on the network can call and the others can't. So, we couldn't figure that out. But anyway, Telstra says that they're working on the issue and we will soon know what's happening. But it's been a big outage. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now, let's take a look at that cold front that we were talking about.
A freezing start to an autumn morning. This footy field at Oberon on the central tablelands better resembled an ice rink. Surrounding slopes were drowning in inches of snow. They were almost fit for skiing.
For the last 30 years, we haven't seen much like this.
The icy snap arrived earlier than usual.
No, we haven't had it this early.
I really don't like the cold there anymore. Yeah, but it's pretty. It brings the tourists up here.
The Southern Highlands received a dusting too.
Oh. You must be a bit chilly, buddy.
Although the snow's isolated, the effects of this cold front were felt across the country. Crosswinds froze flights on the ground at Sydney Airport, others couldn't land. Passengers were left stranded with just one of the 3 runways open. Waves above 10 metres battered the coast and the wind made it unbearable for some.
It's seriously cold.
Very, very cold.
These dangerous conditions kept most people out of the water, but some just couldn't stay away. This is what it's like right along the coast from the Queensland to Victorian borders.
I just got a couple of hours off work and thought my mate's free, let's go for a quick paddle.
A brave way to spend a break.
It is a risk. It's not, but it's things that Australians do. I think nowhere else in the world would you get people running into the surf like you do it here.
If this is anything to go by, we may be in for a very cold winter. Xanthi Gregory, ABC News.
And I will second that because I have a feeling that this is going to be a very, very cold winter. Well, right now, that budget that's going to be presented tonight, what is it going to have? Let's take a look at that.
Well, amid the backdrop of crippling cost of living pressures, the government is about to announce it is back in black this evening, with Federal Treasurer Jim Chalmers delivering the first surplus in 15 years. The dramatic turnaround from the $36.9 billion deficit projected in October has been driven by high commodity prices, a strong jobs market and a boost in net migration.
But it's not expected to stick around, with deficits forecast to return as the government grapples with rising welfare payments and increased costs from the NDIS and aged care. It's a big day in Canberra, so let's start with political reporter Steph Boris. Good morning to you, Steph. Well, this marks the first surplus in more than a decade, so run us through what we know.
Good morning, Lisa. Well, this speculation was mounting and now it is confirmed that the government is expecting a surplus this financial year of $4 billion, and that's despite the fact that in March 2022, when the Coalition handed down their last budget, they were projecting a $78 billion deficit. So it is quite a remarkable turnaround. The reason being there are higher than expected commodity prices. So we're talking there about coal, iron ore, gas, as well as the fact that Australia's unemployment rate is incredibly low at the moment. So that means more people in work, therefore more people are paying tax, and that's bringing in extra money for the government. Now, some of this money will be used to help pay for cost of living relief programs, but a lot of it will be banked. The Treasurer is saying the government's returning 82% of revenue upgrades in this budget to the bottom line because there isn't an expectation that there will be surpluses in the years to come. Now, the other way the government's finding revenue, we know, Lisa, is changes to superannuation for the very wealthy, also alterations to the petroleum resources rent tax and a rise in the tobacco excise.
Well, all's going to be revealed in about 13 and a half hours.
Who's counting, Lisa?
Yes. Well, we've already had quite a few details made public, haven't we?
We have. So, you know, one of the main areas of this budget, of course, is going to be around cost of living. We know that many households are struggling with the pressure to pay their bills, the government all too aware, but it's that balancing act of providing support, but at the same time not increasing inflation any further, which could then, of course, see more interest rate rises. So in terms of cost of living relief, there's a package worth around $15 billion. Included in that is energy relief that we know about, also changes to the single parenting payment. It means that people can stay on that payment until their youngest child turns 14. There will be changes to the job seeker rate, but by how much and to who? Well, we'll learn more about that tonight. On top of that, there are policies that we've heard about for some time, such as cheaper childcare coming into place from July 1, and of course an increase to wages for aged care workers.
So there you are, up to date. There's something that we can look forward to in the budget. Well, tomorrow will be a budget special broadcast from us, and we'll bring to you some of the areas where we think, which way the budget is going. We don't know until it gets announced tonight, but we'll analyze that tomorrow, that's for sure. And you know that sometimes on this program here we have Esti Mardissimo from PRD coming in, and we talk about the Australian capital cities and their livabilities. But are the cities living up to that, or are they losing their livability qualities?
Through COVID, we saw in Australia a lot of people leaving the cities and heading to the regions. I thought that was going to be an ongoing trend. But was it a bit of a blip, do you think?
Well, it was great that people were able to do that, and if you had a job which you could do remotely, that was fantastic. But I think employers and indeed employees have begun to realise that there's what we call a diminishing return from doing that. People are becoming much less productive by working away from the office, and there's a risk that many Australian workers are kind of sleepwalking into a long-term loss of productivity. When you look around the world, actually people are back in the office largely in advanced Asia, in much of Europe, in ASEAN, in the Middle East, and in Latin America. There's more people back in the office than ever before. It's only the USA and Australia that seem to be the laggards, and I wonder why that is.
Do you know why that is? That's fascinating to hear that.
Well, I think in the US it's because there's a high rate of adoption of technology, there's a presumption that workers are mobile, and there's a lower loyalty to place, as it were. But in Australia, I think people are captivated by the idea that this is the new lifestyle, and perhaps are not taking account of the long-term consequences of simply not being with their colleagues and not doing the things they need to do. The Australian economy is en route to being a much more innovation-rich economy, but to be an innovation-rich economy, you need to be in a workplace cooperating with your colleagues.
If you're looking at Australia's cities, Mads was just saying they've been dropping down the livability.
Yeah.
Why is that? Are you much of a fan of Australian cities?
I am an absolute fan of Australian cities, and where they excel is on the lifestyle, the appeal, the vibrancy, the dynamism. But the problem has been that Australian cities have not been preparing for the population growth that comes when you have success. So you see that in of course, the housing market, where there's been a failure simply to build the right number of houses and to link them with the infrastructure and to optimise the land. So what's happening is the appeal is still great, but what actually happens in Australian cities is a much more mixed package, and the world is beginning to find out.
So what do we need to do to, I mean, it's a very big question, obviously,
Yeah.
but to try and improve our housing situation in particular, and then following on from that, make us more livable again?
Yeah, I think there's probably two basic things on the housing side, Madeleine. On the first hand, you need to really diversify the types and tenure of housing. Relying on owner-occupation as the main way to house people is not the way to go. We need to combine owner-occupation with, of course, public housing and social housing, but many more other types, build to rent, more student housing so that students don't compete with local residents. We need to avoid too much housing being used as holiday lets, because that takes housing out of the market. We need to get into more housing co-ops, shared ownership, these kinds of models. So a much broader range of offers is one thing. That's the types and tenures. On the other hand, we need to optimise much more the land, the infrastructure and the existing buildings. So existing buildings means more conversions. When there's lower demand for offices or retail space, think about conversions, make that easy. When we put in the infrastructure, make sure we develop more densely around the stations. And where we've got public land that's being underutilised, let's put that into the mix. We need a revolution in housing supply. This is not just an Australian problem, but Australia's got an acute version of this, partly because the cities are so attractive and therefore people want to come here.
We just saw that story by Michael Rennie in Brisbane about the homelessness problem.
It's heartbreaking.
Which cities around the world have to grapple with this?
Sure.
Do you have a view on how to solve it?
Well, I think there's probably three things that are important to say. On the one hand, anybody can become homeless, and people's lives can change dramatically with losing a job or breaking up with a family, or a crime is committed. Very vulnerable people, more people are vulnerable than we think, and lots of people can become homeless through no fault of their own. The second thing is that people who do become homeless tend to congregate in cities where they might get some services or some help or some other things. So it's not the fault of the cities that they've got homeless people. They've often come from somewhere else. And then thirdly, there's a very complex link, as you will know, between having a job and getting a home. If you haven't got a job, you can't get a home. If you haven't got an address, you can't get a job. So we do need to break that cycle with more advanced services. And we're finding, of course, in Canada, in Europe, in many parts of Asia, that tackling homelessness is really key to creating a much more inclusive city. And of course, homeless itself has negative consequences. It often makes people feel unsafe on the streets. So there are other issues that have to be dealt with.
Just before we let you go, Greg, on a slightly more upbeat note, we've been asking viewers to name their favourite city and the reason that it is their favourite city, not just, because of food, but in terms of livability. I'm sure you get asked this all the time. Do you have a favourite city?
I have many favourite cities, but let me say firstly that Australian cities are amongst my favourites because there's a kind of spirit of freedom combined with a desire to really make the city fresh all of the time, and I want to see more of that. And I'm really optimistic about the investments that are now happening in infrastructure in Australian cities. But I think if you ask me to name one city that's really done some brilliant things, I'd say Vienna. Vienna is an interesting city because there housing affordability is absolutely guaranteed because the government, the city parliament, essentially has created a holding company that invests in all types and tenures of housing, and housing is seen as an amenity, not as a tradable asset, and it's €1 a day to ride on the public transport.
Wow.
So there you go, the livability, what's happening with our Australian cities. Well, right now, the last news that we're going to discuss before we close for today is single parenting payment. Is it going to be off-lifted weights?
How nice is that? From King's Coronation to King's Park. I think I'll do it here this time every day.
Anthony Albanese up early, keen to be seen back with the people ahead of tomorrow's budget.
To make sure that no one's left behind.
Using his discretion as Prime Minister to reveal a women-friendly measure.
We want to extend the financial safety net for single-parent families.
Currently, a single parent with a child under 8 receives $922 a fortnight. As soon as the child turns 8, the parent moves to the lower job seeker rate. But from September 20, they'll be eligible for the higher payment until the child turns 14. A $177 increase for 57,000 parents, 90% of whom are women.
8 was far too low. We think 14 is the right age.
That was something that needed to be fixed, and so we're delighted to see that the government has listened.
Extending the payment was the top recommendation by the Women's Economic Equality Task Force, which emerged from the government's Jobs and Skills Summit.
These women, these parents, make an enormous contribution to our society, to our economy.
Labor's caucus delighted to reverse a clawback of the single-parent payment that was started under John Howard and extended by Julia Gillard.
Labor doesn't get a pat on the back for not even fully reversing the terrible decision it made when it was in government.
Costing almost $2 billion, it's among $15 billion in cost of living relief, including cheaper medicines, an increase to the job seeker payment and electricity subsidies of up to $500 for millions of households.
The only way you can help all Australians with their cost of living crisis is to get inflation down.
Every single decision we take has been mindful of the inflation challenge in the economy, but we also accept that households are doing it tough.
The Finance Minister hinting at the unavoidable fact that some cost of living relief will be inflationary, even a modest increase to JobSeeker. But there's a sense inside government that with the federal budget roaring back towards surplus, it was politically untenable not to spend some of the extra revenue on the most vulnerable. Andrew Probyn, ABC News.
So there you are, ladies and gentlemen, up to date on Australian Indian Radio. Some key, very hot topics there today. And don't forget that the Telstra outages affected so many people, so many businesses. That's happening. And then we have that very cold front that everyone's been confronted with. And many places it's snowing. And of course, the budget is going to be delivered tonight. We'll bring the details to you tomorrow. But for now, let's finish off with all the functions and events taking place in Brisbane. You are up to date, ladies and gentlemen. That's about all we have for you in this segment today. It's been wonderful having your company, and we'll keep an eye out on that Telstra outage and keep looking at our Facebook pages for updates. Until tomorrow, it's goodbye from us. As usual, it's always wonderful to have your company on the show.